So
Recording in progress.
thank you. Yeah, I wasn't waiting. I forgot about that. So there is the reason I did that children's lesson this morning is because I've been thinking about what it means to believe something about yourself and live as to make that story true. And so the title of this is The Power of an Explaining Story. And because we are coming up on Lent, the season of Lent for the Christian world, I've been asking myself this for many, many years. What does it mean to be dust and ashes, to be covered with dust, and to have the sign of the ashes made on your forehead or on your hand? Charles Darwin said that anyone who wishes to make a sizable impact on human history can do it in one of three ways: political action, creating a creed, and the Latin word credo means I believe, or another way to do it, perhaps one of the scariest ways, is to attempt to change the genetic composition of the human species. But, and we are definitely needing to struggle with that one at the moment. But I want to address the second one, what it means to create a creed, what we believe and do in our lives. And I want to do it through the context of Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent. But first, I want you to do some imagining with me. I want you to imagine that you were living in the late 1800s. And I know that's just something we have to imagine. I don't care how old you are. You weren't alive back then, okay? So you can claim how old you are, but you weren't alive in the 1800s. You are an indigenous person, and you are experiencing trauma because of the invasion of a new people. Your experience of them has tragically been through soldiers after the Civil War. And they are telling you that you must now live in a certain place. You must now live in a certain way, or you will die. You have experienced violence as your life has been disrupted. There have been battles, there have been massacres, and there is a deeper question. Why is this happening? What is their explaining story that justifies what they are doing to us? Well, I think certainly some people were asking that question at the time, but it's now history that gives us the opportunity, that allows us, even encourages us to investigate what gives those in power the justification to do what they do. Do we consciously, I'm getting some feedback up here, can I turn off? What? Keep it close to me? Okay. All right. Now we're going to have to turn the volume down a little bit. Do we, today, do you consciously or unconsciously believe what our ancestors did that allowed them to do what they did to indigenous people? How do we deal with the past, and how do we address the future in light of what we believe? Some heavy questions, I guess. So imagine you are alive back in the 1800s, and you're sitting around a fire at night in your hogan or your lodge or your teepee or your longhouse, wherever it was that you were living, and you are hearing your leaders offer an explanation based on their understanding of who these invaders are. Okay, so your leaders are talking to you about what's going on in your life, and they tell you, this is where our Creator put us, this home where we were birthed from the ground and our ancestors are buried. Our Creator put us here. This is what we believe about ourselves. These are the stories we tell. This other people, they believe their God told them that this is now their land, given to them. It's their explaining story. They say it's true. but it's not true for us. Now I want you to go back farther than 150 years. Imagine being alive 2,600 years ago, all right? If you can do that. In the 6th or the 5th centuries before the Common Era, about the time that the stories in Genesis chapters 1 through 4 were being told around night fires in lodges or hogans or whatever it was that people had, mud huts perhaps. Those stories of creation and fall in Genesis 1 through 4, like it or not, have become our explaining stories. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to take them literally. They were not meant, in my opinion anyway, to present the facts of what happened and when it happened. So the invitation is to take them mythologically. Please, take them mythologically, because they were meant to convey truths and understandings of what is and what will ever be. And if that rings a bell, it's because it's from a Led Zeppelin song, and I quoted Led Zeppelin last time I was here, so I'm doing it again, okay? Whether it took 7 days or 7 million years or however, many years it took, the story says basically that God created the world and us too. And it should be a positive story. It should be a blessing. It's a story of how God created the world and us. But part of the story in Genesis 1 to 4 says that we humans succumbed to temptation and ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve made a decision that determined our future. The name of Adam means literally from the ground, and the name Eve means life from the ground, so that's a nice way to understand it. So even if Adam and Eve of this story did not literally exist, most interpretations of the story say there is something fundamentally wrong with us. It's called sin. And because we have fallen, we now experience suffering and death. The explaining story that we have come to believe about ourselves is negative. And this is part of that explaining story. Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman. To the woman he said, I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And to the man he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree about which I commanded you, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. Because our ancestors sinned and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as a punishment, we are cut off from the tree of life, that other tree, and banished from the Garden of Eden. And God is on guard to make sure we will not succeed if and when we storm the gates to get back in. That's in there too later. Then what happens? Well, Adam and Eve have sex, which is now a shameful act. And Eve gives birth to Cain, who is a farmer, and then Abel, who is a shepherd, and each of them brings offerings to God, and God accepts Abel's offering, not Cain's, and there's no explanation given in Genesis as to why that's the case. But the end result is it makes Cain very angry, and he kills Abel, And then the descendants of Cain are further banished east of Eden to the land of Nod. And one of my favorite songs has been from musician Danny O'Keefe, who said it well in his song. And I always thought this would be a wonderful book to write, and I haven't gotten around to doing that yet, so just this line is good enough. Cain said to Adam, his father, "How can it be fair? You double my burden and you lessen my share. Your love is uneven and so is the score, and you force me to wander from door to door." Hard times. We are really screwed. Fundamentally flawed, banished from the garden, and cursed to return to the dust of the ground. But there's more. So jump ahead again now, but stay back 150 years and try to understand how someone can come to believe what they do about themselves that justifies theft, slavery, and massacre. And I paraphrase Charles Darwin, human history is determined by what we believe about ourselves. Perhaps you can understand it personally. Have you ever had an experience in which you discovered that what you have long believed about yourself is not true? Or perhaps you decided that you didn't need to continue to live in a way that reinforced a negative belief about yourself? One of those life-changing aha moments, perhaps. And if a story then applies to all humanity, as these stories are generally, that's how we usually treat them, as we think Genesis 3-4 does, applies to all of us, what if we got the story wrong? Is there another way to understand it? So years ago, I discovered this book, Ishmael, perhaps you have read it, by Daniel Quinn, and it just blew up my world. It's a novel set in a Socratic dialogue between a generic man, intentionally a generic man, not a woman, and a gorilla, Ishmael being the gorilla, Ishmael also being the banished and firstborn son of Abraham and one of his slaves, Hagar, which opens up a whole nother interesting interpretation. But Ishmael the gorilla speaks for all those and all nature who have suffered at the hands of those who believe God gave certain people the manifest destiny to rule. And through Ishmael, then, Daniel Quinn, as an author, exposes the belief within which we live, by questioning the origin and truth of what we have taken to be our explaining story. Ishmael also points out that it's like water to a fish. It's like air that we breathe. We don't even really recognize it's there. It doesn't matter if we literally believe the story or not. We live it, and we make it true by continuing to live it. And we can't change it until we become woke to it, and I'm being very intentional about using that word in this day and age, in what I would say is a positive way. We can't change it until we become woke to it or wake up to it, and then find a different story within which to live, or we will keep living the same story century after century. Maybe that's why it's important to encourage our kids to ask themselves who they are. Our creed is there is something fundamentally wrong with us. We suffer, we die, and we return to the dust of the earth as a punishment for our sins. And that's our explaining story. Okay, so the idea that Daniel Quinn presents is that the story that we believe about ourselves is similar to what we have been told by may have been told by indigenous people about this new people that was committing genocide. So this is a kind of a big jump here, but they are saying to themselves, that's bizarre. They think these new people, they think that they have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They think they have. Get the implication? They haven't really done it. Ishmael is suggesting that the story of original sin and being cursed in the ground is a story that indigenous people were telling about someone else as a way of understanding why this strange people could do these things to them. These people must think that they have the wisdom and the power of the gods. Why else would they act in this way? Don't they know that what we know, that the tree of life is there for all of creation? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil belongs to the gods, not to humans. They haven't eaten of it because no one can. And now, centuries later, we have lived the story believing that we are just as wise and powerful as the gods, and our punishment is that we will die. Go figure why that makes sense. Here's an idea. We got the story wrong, and we don't know how to live a different one. And as we have lived it, making it true, we've done a pretty thorough job of getting rid of anyone else who lives a different story. So a thought from farmer, poet, philosopher, eminent wise man, Wendell Berry. We cannot live except within limits. And these limits are of many kinds: spatial, material, moral, spiritual. The world has room for many people who are content to live as humans, but only for a relative few intent upon living as giants or gods. So if all this is somewhat confusing, I get it. My head still hurts when I try to keep it all straight. It's like being very right-handed and then trying to change it. If you've never tried that, you should try it. Or it's trying to learn to read or do math through traditional methods when your brain works in a very different way. And perhaps some of you have had that experience. I know I had it trying to learn how to do math in high school and chemistry in high school. My brain doesn't work that way. I always thought it was because I was a failure as a student till someone pointed out to me it might have been the teacher, even though you loved your teacher very much, didn't know how to teach to you. Doesn't mean you weren't smart or couldn't do it. My brain worked in a different way. It's like believing you're the biological or genetic child of your parents and then learning that you're adopted. So I'll sum it up as simply as I can. The story seems to say, and I emphasize that, seems to say that God told us not to eat of that tree, but we did it anyway. And now we are destined to die as a punishment. But Ishmael, this wise gorilla, says that you can eat all the apples or the dates or the figs that you want. They won't give you the knowledge of good and evil. That's the knowledge that belongs to God or the gods. What you have, what we have, is the tree of life. Live within the laws of nature, and life is yours. And within that garden of life, you are born from the dust of the earth, and to that dust and earth you will return. Why did the gods create it that way? We don't know. That's the wisdom of the gods. Who knows? That's their decision, not ours. So we have a choice with what to do with that. You could say life is a gift, and life includes death. Even though we don't quite get it, we don't need to be saved from the earth and dust. There's nothing wrong with being human and being subject to the laws of the universe. In fact, if we live within the laws of the universe, the tree of life continues to be ours. We're not banished from the garden. And that sounds like a blessing to me. But when we stray from it, if we turn a blessing into a curse, then life as we know it will end. It's our choice. So back to the season of Lent. Begins this Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. It is when Christians acknowledge that we are born from the dust, and to the dust we will return. If one looks hard enough and deep enough, going beyond a narrow and possibly, or I think, a misinterpretation of an explaining story, as most Christians and others do, one might come to realize that there is plenty of room for us to change our minds and live within the limits of what it means to be a human being in this garden that we call home. Lent can be a time we humbly recognize our place on this earth as humans. Not created to be, never created to be perfect or sinless or flawed or broken, just created to be human within creation. So then, in years past, my practice had become on Ash Wednesday when I put ashes on people's foreheads and mix it with the garden, the soil from the garden and the ashes from Palm Sunday branches and some olive oil. I like to say these words of blessing, which made sense to me as I learned them years into my ministry, as a new story in which to live, and the blessing is this: you are dust and ashes, and for your sake, the world was created. Amen. Thank you for putting up with me. I appreciate it.